I hereby call to order this meeting of the District 200 School Board. Mr. Hutchison, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Gambiani?
Here.
Mr. Hanlon?
Here.
Mr. Matheson?
Here.
Mr. Paulson?
Here.
Mrs. Crabtree is absent. Mrs. Erickson is absent. Mr. Broman?
Here. Dr. Kyle, would you please lead us in Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Board members, are there any modifications to the agenda that any board member would wish to make? Hearing none, we will move to public comments. The opportunity to speak to the board is provided for members of the public who have a question or comment on an agenda item. The board appreciates hearing from stakeholders and values your thoughts and questions. The board strives to make the best decisions for the district, and public input in a variety of venues is very helpful. The board must protect the civility and decorum of this meeting. Please be respectful for the duties of the board and the democratic process in your comments tonight. Please use the microphone, state your name, and address your comments to the board. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Mr. Paulson here will be timing. At the 2.5-minute mark, he will raise his hand and let you know you have 30 seconds left. Please be factual and courteous and do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or staff. If you feel your matter needs to be discussed in more detail, please attend the board's chance to chat or present your comments to us in writing. The first resident I have signed up is Gabby Resnick. Gabby?
So where do we speak from? Oh, but there's no mic. Oh, there's no. Hello again. My name is Gabby Resnick, and I'm a resident of District 200. I wanted to thank the members of the board for their continued engagement on the issue of Policy 7.40. I also wanted to thank Dr. Schuler for his recent proposal regarding the same policy. I appreciate Dr. Schuler's suggestion of submitting this to the CAC for review and input. While this might be most convenient, it seems unlikely that much thoughtful discussion will be possible in such a large group. If it is not possible to form a smaller subcommittee made up of just 8 to 10 various representatives, similar to the one that drafted the original policy over 18 years ago, a policy that was implemented without issue for almost 2 decades, I respectfully suggest a subcommittee of board members. We've elected the board members because we trust them to represent the community's best interests. Once it became clear that the changes submitted by Dr. Schuler earlier this year would impact students in unexpected negative ways, the board has been listening to the community's concerns and engaged. Again, thank you. Your genuine care for every student in the district is appreciated. The time, dedication, and thoughtfulness you put into each issue does not go unnoticed. As your constituent, and more importantly, your neighbor, I thank you.
The next individual I have signed up for public comment is Sydney Westray.
Hello again, my name is Sydney Westray, I live in Wheaton. First, I'm thrilled that we have gotten to this point, so thanks to each and every one of you for helping move this along. So I was encouraged to see on the agenda a policy, but I noticed as I was reading through the agenda that this is getting pitched to the Citizens Advisory Committee for review, and I found myself wondering why a 30-member committee would be chosen to be the judge and jury on this issue that affects 12 homeschool students. It seems a committee like that with 0 to few touch points with this implementation of this policy might not be a great use of time. In fact, the touch points would be the administrators, some homeschoolers, some other parents, and of course board members. So I hope you'll take that to heart in your discussion tonight. Also, I did buy a football card today. Go Falcons.
Only one, huh?
I had 2 students pending.
Yes.
That's all right. Those of us who had kids attend South won't take any umbrage. The Third individual I have signed up for public comments is Carol O'Hare.
My name is Carol O'Hare. I'm a resident of District 200. Thank you, Board of Education. We appreciate your willingness to listen to our concerns on Policy 7.40, and especially thank you for the action item on tonight's agenda that would enable students entering or already in the midst of their high school program to continue their extracurricular activities. I urge you to approve this item at your meeting tonight so the students have some relief while the committee studies a solution that would serve all District 200 students. On the matter of a committee, to remand this to the CAC seems unwise, as that is a large group with no homeschool representation, and the time to get a final decision would be considerable. A better solution would be a smaller committee for just this item alone, with members from a variety of settings, including homeschool. Thank you for your continued consideration of this item and your desire to make this community one that serves students of every variety.
The next individual I have signed up for public comments is Harold Longs. Harold?
Yes, my name is Harold Longs. I'm a district parent, taxpayer, and a parent of District 200. I'd just like to first thank Dr. Schuler for responding back to my email this afternoon regarding the policy 7.4. I also agree with what the other people said regarding the CAC being in charge of spearheading changes to the policy. I also think it should be run by administrators, along with a board member or two, along with some parents and maybe some other people from the public to get input regarding the topic, and they're doing the right thing for their homeschoolers. And I'd also like to thank you for answering the question regarding what the cells are mentioned in the personnel report. And that's what I have to say. Thanks.
The next individual signed up for comments is Jan Shaw.
I'm going to change topics a little bit. We're going to budget. But before I get to that, Mr. Broman, did you read the teacher's salary teacher's contract that you signed and actually compare it to the last one? You somewhere not approved by this year in the highlights, but went in there, is the number of extra sick days. Everybody gets 15. They've been here 8 years, they now get 17. Top end, they get 27 sick days a year. That was not in the contract last year. Last year was based on the sick bank getting full. This year is based on the number of years they've worked. You will have gone from 300 teachers getting extra sick days to over 700 teachers getting extra sick days. And that was never approved. So you either should change the contract to match what you approved and re-sign it, or you should re-vote and vote to pass what actually got signed. But the two conflict. The next point I want to talk about is the budget. If you look at the budget, you'll see that they're planning to build a new preschool despite the fact that we voted it down in a referendum twice now. They claim they're doing this without raising taxes. However, we know in 2014 they put out what we refer to as a backdoor referendum, which means they issue bonds by putting a notice in the newspaper, waiting 30 days, and then issuing them. In 2014, they issued 10 million bonds. They've already been spent. This year, because of the teacher's contract and the new Jefferson they're planning to build, my guess is it's going to be between $25–30 million worth of bonds they're going to be issuing. And they're going to do it without a referendum unless we get an army of people to get some signatures to say, we want a real referendum. And if we get a real referendum, then if it gets voted down, they're in trouble because they've already spent it. The other issue is the fact that they cannot legally build a new building without a referendum to build a new building, because you can't lease something that doesn't exist yet. I even found another district in which some of the residents put in a lawsuit to stop their district, and in that district, they looked at it, they looked at the law, they looked at their legal counsel's opinion, and they decided they'd go for a real referendum rather than waste the money going to court. Okay, so just saying, if anybody would like to help sue the school district, I'm game, but I'm not gonna do it all by myself. So basically, if they don't do the backdoor referendum, in less than 10 years, you can expect your property taxes to go down by 10%. If we let them do the backdoor referendum, consider it a home equity line rather than a mortgage, and they will pay it off for a couple years, and then they'll borrow it again, and then they'll pay it off, and they'll borrow it again, and they'll pay it off, and they'll borrow it again, and there's $20 million per year going to pay off bond indebtedness that should go down to zero, and that money is going to continue forever until the taxpayers somehow tell them no. Anyway, take a look at the whole budget. There'll be a budget review next month. So if you care about your taxes, take a peek at that one. Is that it?
I believe the next individual that signed up is Mark McMillan, is that right?
Good evening. My name is Mark McMillan. I'm a longtime resident of District 200 in Wheaton. And those of you who I've had some interaction with in the past will know that I was actually a member of the committee that wrote the original Policy 7.40. So that's the topic I want to talk about tonight. What I just passed out was the draft of the interim draft of the Policy 7.40 that Dr. Schuler posted with the agenda. And first, I'd like to really thank Dr. Schuler and his team for the work to put together to get this out. It's greatly appreciated, and I think they've done a pretty good job. I just want to point out a couple of things that I think should be revised, some pretty minor things before this is put up and posted for approval. So I passed out a copy that's marked to show the changes that I suggest. The first point is that in the section on part-time attendance, there is a requirement that the students enrolling for part-time attendance the programs are available on a space available basis. And I'm not sure that that's really in the spirit of what we've been talking about in terms of community participation all along here. And what I would suggest is that if those students register for those programs, those classes in the normal time frame, they're in the pool with everybody else. And that if they come in after the, and here what was in the draft was the May 1 date, then it would be space available if they came in after May 1. The second point is the last paragraph in the part-time attendance section is really, which I've highlighted with a little comment there, is really talking about assignment of grades and academic credits being brought in. And to me, this really seems like it fits in perhaps policy 7.110, which deals with incoming transfer students really than what deals with a current part-time attending student. On the next page in section D, this is for the extracurricular activities. Here, I think there are just two words missing, credit and requirements in the sentence about eligibility purposes will be granted credit towards district graduation requirements. But otherwise, I think that's great. And really the last 2 points, you go to the credit and grade placement section. The first paragraph had in it that a student shall receive credit up to 2 credits per semester, and since the policy up above requires students to get 5 classes, or what's really 2.5 credits, I think to make this conform, it should be 2.5 credits, so I made that change. And then last, the paragraph right after that, this is inserted in the April version of the policy, and so I think it's in a different context than what we're trying to do here. But it says grade placement, and most importantly, credits earned will be accepted if the school has a certificate of non-public school recognition. And as a homeschool parent, you can't get that, among other things. It's available only to 501c3 nonprofit organizations. And so in the context of the program here, the policy is just in conflict, and I would suggest that it go in the policy 7.110 and not in the homeschooling participation section. That was it. Thanks again. Really appreciate your help.
The next individual I signed up is Beth McMillan.
Hello and thank you. I'm Beth McMillan and I'm a District 200 resident. Thank you. Thank you for this new draft of the policy. Thank you so much for hearing all of our concerns tonight. We do appreciate your willingness to work with us and bring the policy to this point. We are grateful for your efforts to include our children. With you, we earnestly desire that the next generation be well-read, educated, law-abiding citizens who care for their neighbors, and we think that working together is beneficial to everyone. We are asking you to vote tonight. We are asking you to accept the new policy with the changes that Mark just suggested and that you have in front of you so that this policy can work. And by accepting those changes, there won't be any internal conflict. Thank you for voting and thank you for all that you've done for us.
The next is Jeff Parker. Mr. Parker.
Good evening. I just want to echo what has already been said. Great thanks for where we've got to here up to this point, and just for how you guys have taken the time, extra meetings, to allow us to voice our concerns, voice our desires, and your willingness to really work through this with us. So thank you again to all of you. One thing I would just request as you continue to process this forward, as the subcommittee is created, that there would just be some representation here from, if it's a committee of 8, 3 or 4 from this group that have a stake in the game as far as have kids in the blended program, we'll just put it that way. And there's a lot of knowledge here as far as the process and the issues and the concerns that are raised. And it would just be helpful for all of us to be able to communicate any concerns that we would have as process and procedures and dialogue is being taken place. So that's really all I want. Thank you for the time tonight, for taking an extra meeting. We know that you're giving up your personal time, and so we just really all appreciate that. So.
And the next individual I have signed up is Connie Schmidt. Connie?
I have some business cards I'd like to share, but I'll send to Diana and pass them on as appropriate. That's okay. Hi, nice to see you tonight. I'm a previous teacher at CUSD200 and a very caring resident of the district in Warrenville. I'm here today because I care about the bills we pay as a school district. I want to encourage you to consider solar power for District 200. In December of 2016, a new law was passed in Illinois that is called the Future Energy Jobs Act. We call it FEJA. This promotes renewable energy projects, and it promotes energy efficiency, and it promotes clean energy. I know that here in District 200, energy efficiency has been a priority for our district with Colin Wilkie's outstanding efforts, and I don't think we could get any better. However, we have not tapped the idea of solar panels as far as I know. There are 4 reasons for you to consider solar energy. It will lower your electric costs, your electric bills. So you'll save money. It will create more power. If you create more power than you need, you can feed it back onto the grid and have credits on cloudy days. Developers, and this is the most important one, and I had a developer here and met with 2 members of your staff. Developers will pay for the panels at a 0 cost to District 200 so that they will get the renewable energy certificates. They will get the payback because they own the power. District 200 gets the lower energy bills. Some developers even have highly interesting STEM curriculum to offer school districts for kindergarten through high school. The developer that I had here held a seminar this summer, and we had some Wheaton North teachers attend. I am aware that the district is considering plans on a brand new school. Whether or not you do that, it would be a good suggestion for the panels. But if not, I'm aware that there are 3 buildings with new roofs. Those would be perfect things areas to consider. I have someone here in the audience today with me who's a member of the Illinois Solar Energy Association. We have people who live right in your district that can provide information on reliable vetted installers as well. Many schools are jumping on this bandwagon with the new law. The benefits of the law are the highest this year. They'll slightly decrease next year, and they'll be less in 5 years. Your benefits are greater the sooner you act. I emailed you earlier this summer information about 2 schools, and there were links attached about Lake Park High School and North Central College. Now is the time to act. I wanted to say more, but I won't. But can I just have, I was selected to speak for you, and there's a couple people in the audience who are just going to wave and say they're here to support clean energy. Could you guys do that? If you're here to support clean energy, wave so they know why you're here. Thank you.
And the last individual I signed up for public comments on agenda items is Denise Parker.
Okay, I'm Denise Parker, and I live in the district in Wheaton. I have been at a lot of the previous meetings regarding policy 7.40 and have not spoken because public speaking to me is anything more than 3 people I don't know, and so I'm not very eager to do it, but I am here tonight just because I'm so grateful. When I got the, it wasn't an email, but when someone told me to click and see what had been proposed, I just kept reading it and I was like, does this say what I think it says? And so, I also just really wanted to say thank you. I also wanted to thank you for your service. When I was in school, I hated group projects, and I just can't believe, I feel like you should make it a graduation requirement that every student should come and see what goes on here, just because I was overwhelmed at my first meeting with, we all went home and you guys went and did even more. And just the time commitment and the breadth and depth of the issues that you cover and the magnitude that they are for people's lives, as has been spoken so far. So I just want to thank you from my family. I thought maybe I should say who my kids are. I have a 2012 graduate from Wheaton North, and he's now in the Army. He went to West Point. Then I have okay, I'm digressing from my notes. This is why I don't do public speaking. So, 2 points. I just want to reiterate what I culled from people's comments before that I took away and that I was hoping that you all would take away is that the people that do some sort of alternate enrollment and also have their kids in extracurriculars are not a monolithic group. And so I think my family fits into that. My oldest was a full-time public high school. My daughter had some interesting interests, ancient languages that she could not pursue by being a full-time public school student. But we did not want to isolate our kids from our community and our neighbors, and we loved running into Coach B at Jewel. And so my second point is just the reason I'm so thankful for this policy is that I think in the divided world that we live in, it's a unifying policy by allowing as many students as can participate in the district as much as they can. We all know that what students learn is not just in books. And so the intangible education that's provided by sports and music and clubs are fertile soil for developing good citizens, team players, and people who can work with others. And then, as has been mentioned, I just heard, about the larger committee thing. And again, it seems like a group project is much more effective the smaller the group is. So, and the more people that have a stake in the issue at hand or the goal of the project. So, thanks for listening.
We will then move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Vroman. Just a couple of things that
I want to share with the board this evening under my report, number one, thank you to the board members that attended and participated in both of the, as we'll call them, both 4th of July parades. One I know was on the 3rd of July in Warrenville, and then 4th of July in Wheaton, along with Dr. Kyle and Dr. Salagi at the parades. I know that it meant a lot to the community to have you participate in those opportunities, so thank you for that. Along that line, I want to make a couple of introductions tonight because it's their first meeting as part of the senior leadership team. So we have Dr. Kyle, who is the new Assistant Superintendent for Administrative Services, so welcome. And we have Dr. Salagi, who assumed the role of Assistant Superintendent for Student Services. And then also hiding in the back is Kim Funkhauser. Kim is the new Maureen. She is the comptroller treasurer for the district, so welcome. I wanted to share with the board in your green folders this evening, you're going to see about a 3-page document that looks like this, has a lot of numbers on it. That is the recent, most recent that we have view of our elementary section size, class size numbers. So we monitor this through the summer to ensure that we are compliant with the parameters that have been set around class size targets, certainly. Just a kind of a quick introduction to how you read it. It's organized by school. Then by each school it goes down by grade level from kindergarten to 5th grade. Gives you the total number of students reported in Synergy. Synergy is our student information system. And then you're going to see another set of numbers just to the right. The reason why there is a discrepancy between those two numbers is that when we monitor class size numbers, we're monitoring the number of students that are actually in those classrooms. Synergy also monitors students at a particular grade level that may be in a specialized program. So at a number of our buildings, we may have some special education classes or specific self-contained classes that are tracked apart from our core section numbers. And so that's why we provide that second number to the right. And then you have the number of average number within each of the sections and the number of sections at that particular building. So you can see as you go down through, our elementary schools are all different sizes. We've got a couple of 2-section schools, some 3-section schools, and then a couple of 4-section schools. So that just gives you the sense. If it's highlighted in yellow, that means it's a section that we're monitoring because the numbers are appearing close to that cap, and when we've got it highlighted in yellow, it means that we are within 3 or 4 students of kind of hitting that cap number. So if you move beyond that cap number, that's the point when we would give consideration or add a section to that level. So again, we continue to monitor. Chris will continue to monitor these throughout the summer, but just wanted to give you an update in terms of where we are at. And again, I think we've got 5 sections noted on the sheet where we're kind of watching or monitoring those sections in terms of the ball. So, okay.
Dr. Schuler, I noticed in Lowell there's an asterisk furlough.
Yeah. So there are a couple of situations in particular. And at Lowell, what you'll note is that those numbers, that average number is actually relatively low. It's low based on what we have enrolled at this point, but Lowell in particular, we do have some students that are coming in through our World Relief Partnership that we know are coming within a grade level, and so we've held a couple of spots in terms of the class size number there. So that's just any place where there's a specific consideration of a student that we know is in fact coming, or students that are coming.
In the future, maybe for a point of reference, would it be possible to list the previous year's enrollments so we can see that change over change? Because these are pretty, especially at the high school level, they're very, not disturbing, but they're pretty low numbers at the high schools.
Yeah, we can certainly provide that, and actually, Jim, I think those numbers are actually relatively consistent with where our enrollments were at the high school, but we can certainly give you that.
I have a couple of questions on that.
Yep.
What do we, let's say we're looking at, I noticed Pleasant Hill was not addressed as one of the concern items, but I see the fourth grade's got almost 29 students in that section. And we've addressed this in the past. We don't have room to do another section there, do we? I mean,
We would.
okay, but it's not highlighted. Why? I mean, that's one of the highlights.
Yeah, well, highlighted, Jim, so they're highlighted if we are within 4 students of getting to the need to add another section. So if another student were to enroll at Pleasant Hill, we're probably at that particular grade level you're talking about, that one likely gets highlighted as well. So it's just not right now based on the numbers that we have within the system. But again, we kind of monitor we highlight those monitor numbers when we're within a certain number of students that would trigger the decision to add another section.
Okay, that one is the highest of all, isn't it? And the Longfellow has a 28, and there's 129 at Johnson.
Yeah, but again, so 2 things to note. Our class size cap triggers up by 2 within grade level bands. So it's 26 at grades K1, it's 28 at grades 2-3, and it's 30 at grades 4-5. So the numbers, so there may be some sections highlighted, like Madison second grade is highlighted with the 27, but that's because the target or the cap at that level is 28. Also want to just mention the board, I'll shift topics gears for a second. I'm going to send around a copy of a program from yesterday. The DuPage County dedicated a new building yesterday, their new DUCOM facility that manages emergency response across the county. Erica, Charlie, and I had an opportunity to attend the ribbon cutting on that facility, and it was very, very well done. But I will send it around. You'll note in there that Mayor Brummel from Warrenville was intricately involved in the work to bring about that new DUCOM facility. Also, it was a nice opportunity, and it brought together a number of our first responder groups that we work closely with on our safety committee. So I just thought the board would be interested in seeing that. 2 more quick updates. Website. So I think the board knows throughout this summer we've been working on a rollout of a new website template. We should roll out that new website end of July. We're still on target to hit the end of July. They're kind of working through some final testing, I think, of the look on the new website. One of the reasons I wanted to mention that that's rolling out in July is that at the board's last meeting, you approved the new strategic plan and a new dashboard. We have not posted that new dashboard yet on the website because there's a lot of programming that would have to go into formatting that new version of the website, and we didn't want to do that in 2 places. We would be investing a lot of time. So it's being programmed to go live as soon as the new website is live. So just again, if you get any questions on the new dashboard metrics and or strategic plan, that will be posted as soon as the new version of the website is live at the end of this month. And then finally, I just want to report progress on our summer facilities work. We continue to make great progress. We've got projects going at 14 of the 20 schools across the district. We are on target still in terms of the projects, especially the more significant secure entry projects continuing to move along. Have not really encountered any major unforeseen circumstances in any of that. We've got a couple of paving projects that should, within the next week, should get started, and those are really the last projects where we could potentially encounter an unforeseen circumstance with any undercutting that would need to be done on the paving. But knock on wood, so far we've been good in terms of not encountering those unforeseen. So we are still well within the budget approved by the board, and again should be on target to have all of those projects complete. And seems like summer just started, but as we look to the calendar, we really only have a month to get those projects wrapped and make sure that
the buildings are not only complete but clean before students and staff are back. So again, we continue to make good progress. So thank you to JR and his crew that have been managing both significant construction and obviously the cleaning of our facilities this summer. That's it.
Any questions or comments from board members of Dr. Schuler? Hearing none, we'll go on to the consent agenda. I will read the items in the consent agenda. Number 1, appointment of district representative to DuPage West Cook County Governing Board. 2, approval of intergovernmental agreement with the City of Warrenville. 3, approval of zero graphic bond paper bid. 4, approval of print shop paper bid. 5, approval of the resolution authorizing transfer of monies from Operations and Maintenance Fund to Capital Projects Fund. 6, approval to open previously closed minutes. 7, approval of the IASB 2018-19 annual dues. 8, approval of the 2018 LUDA membership dues. 9, approval of bills payable and payroll. 10, approval of minutes, June 13, 2018 open, June 21, 2018 special meeting open, and approval to destroy recordings of closed sessions prior to February 2017 as allowable by law. And 11, approval of personnel report to include employment, resignation, retirement, and leave of absence of administrative, certified, classified, and non-union staff. Are there any items board members want removed from the consent agenda? Hearing none, Dr. Schuler?
No additional information on any of the consent agenda items.
Board members have any questions or comments? Jim?
Yeah, I have a question on the finance one, on the transfer. What is the amount we're transferring? I can't open that up right this time. Okay, we had talked about $2 million total coming from fund balance for secure entries. Is that up to $2 million? Okay.
Jim?
Yes, I just had a point of clarification for me on the personnel report, and it was addressed or touched on during public comment. So can you explain that cell concept that was listed on the report this time, please?
Sure. So for all of the new teacher hires, there are 2 things that are posted on the personnel report next to the teacher's salary. It lists the level of education teachers bringing in and then what's called a cell. So we still have hired teachers that have come in with varying years of experience, some that are coming in without any previous experience, some that have come in with some years of teaching experience. As we've established an entry point salary for them, we've still given, I guess, credit to that experience that they're bringing to District 200. So in our current payroll system, as we've rolled off of what was the previous salary schedule, we still have teachers in the system that are noted in a cell that is largely tied to experience that they have within the district. And so as we've brought in new hires, we've matched them up with an employee that has like education and experience, and that's what's noted on that piece. We don't in fact have a salary schedule anymore, but that just gives a reference point to the salary that obviously has been identified for that employee that we're hiring. As we move forward, we're not going to be able to use that terminology anymore. It's really available to us in the fact that we're rolling off of that schedule, but we still really have employees kind of largely sitting in cells based on where they were in the salary schedule.
In that same regard, why would we hire a teacher in cell 5 versus cell 1 unless they have some kind of specialty, or, again, from a point of view of a cost effective?
Yeah, it's a good question. So sometimes it's just based on the actual market of employees or the applicant pool. So we've had some positions harder to fill positions. We just haven't had a huge range of applicants to pick from. Our goal is still to hire the highest quality staff that we can within a guideline or a parameter. So what we work with our principals on, the general parameter that we give is we'll honor up to 5 years of experience, and so that gives them the ability to still obviously vet candidates and make what they believe to be the best decision for the need that they're hiring for. Jim, you're right. I guess the most fiscally conservative solution would be to simply say, hire everybody with absolutely no experience, but I don't think that's always the best solution to make sure that we hire the highest quality staff that we can.
Okay, and then to follow up to that, if we hire someone that has 5 years' experience, are they tenured elsewhere, or are they tenured when they come here?
They are not tenured when they come here. They may have been tenured elsewhere, but they still have to reestablish tenure here.
Any other questions from board members of Dr. Schuler with respect to consent agenda items? Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Paulson,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Broman?
Yes, the consent agenda is approved. We now move to action items. The first action item is the approval to post revised policy 7.40, non-public school students for public review and comment. Dr. Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Broman. So the policy 740 that has been recommended to the board this evening for posting does reflect the feedback that we received from the board at the last meeting. So it is a version of 740 very similar to the previous version of 740. So it does allow for participation in all extracurricular activities for students at the elementary, middle school. It allows for participation in all non-IHSA high school activities in any of those first three categories. All the student needs to do or family needs to do is make application to the building principal, inform the building principal of their interest in participating. There's some further language in the policy that maps out what the requirements are if it is an IHSA governed activity, and again, those requirements are really reflect what's in the IHSA bylaws in terms of establishing that the program that the student is in fact taking matches, I guess, a program that would be offered in District 200. So all of those pieces are highlighted there. I do want to just mention to the board what you are approving this evening is the posting of this policy. I did include the language in the board summary about this moving on to Citizens Advisory Committee. You're not really taking action to approve that step this evening. You're taking action to approve the posting of that policy. One comment on that I will make, and that's that we've worked with the Citizens Advisory Committee for 3 years now. It is a group that represents the community at large. Not all of the individuals that serve on Citizens Advisory Committee have students in school. There are some that have had students that have gone through our schools, some that have had students that have gone through private schools, some that don't have children in District 200, and we intentionally, I think, built that group to make sure that it represented the entirety of our community. That's certainly is the goal. There are, and as I think we talked about policy 740, there are some related policies that are impacted by the decisions that we make around 740. We identified a couple in section 6 of your policy manual when we look at graduation requirements, when we look at credits that are given for correspondence courses. I do absolutely believe as we look at the same time at some of those policies, we do need representation that I think truly certainly represents the school district. CAC is not a decision-making body. They don't write policy. They can't write policy. Only the Board of Education can ultimately write and approve policy, and so I would absolutely expect that your board policy committee, your HR policy committee, would still shepherd the actual writing of a new policy. I think CAC is an avenue to get some input into the direction that policy takes. But the board itself is still going to have to shepherd the writing of that policy. So again, not a decision you have to make tonight, but I do think that's absolutely a good and an appropriate group to use to vet and get some feedback on, the direction that we take as we move forward with potentially any changes. And it may be that the board decides the version of the policy you're approving this evening is the policy that you stay with for a period of time. It may be that there are no future changes to that policy, but I think CAC is a good group to make sure that you get feedback on all of the related issues. So with that, I would recommend that the board vote to approve the posting of that policy or your policy process. If you vote on that this evening, it will get voted for, or will get posted for public review and comment, and would come back to the board in August for official approval.
Any questions, comments, or thoughts? Chair?
I have a couple of thoughts. Number one, I think that, I wasn't here last meeting, I'm sorry that I may not have contributed at the time. I think that one of the big issues that I'm not clear on is where the ISHA stands on this issue. I know we were going to talk to them and whether they made any kind of decision, number one. Number two, I think, again, it's clear that we're talking about the posting of the policy here. And in the verbiage in the posting is the talk about the CAC. I believe that we've probably scrutinized this policy more than any policy I've seen in the last 6 years. And, I think that, I'm to the point that I think, again, Mr. McMillan's submission tonight, I don't know if it's a representation of the entire community that's, been voicing to us, but, again, it's very similar to what we have already proposed in this policy. And, it feels like to me we're really close. And, I don't know that I want to take that time to extend this on for another, I don't know, the CAC isn't even formed yet, I don't think, for next year with all the seats filled. So I really, I like an audience, but I don't know that we need to have them there for the next, multiple months. I think I'm ready to kind of make some, it is nice to see you all, but I do think that I'm ready to, with some of these modifications, I'd like your reaction as administratively to some of these suggested changes, and incorporate what you're talking about on subsection 6 and the other related parties. But I think we're very close to getting this done. I don't know that I want to have this studied, or I think we have bigger projects to deal with as we move on in the year. So I'm a little reluctant to say we should send it on to CAC. I think they could make some other more significant contributions, because I think we're pretty close on this. So that would be my reaction to it.
Jim, I think I largely agree with you that what we have here at 7.40 could be the final product. I'd like to have a Citizens Action Committee take a look at that and confirm it in my mind. But what really attracts me to having the CAC look at this is not so much looking at this specific policy, but the other policies that were related to 7.40 with respect to correspondence courses, credit from COD courses. There are inconsistencies in these other policies. And what is open and available, for example, to homeschool students, should be open and available to our full-time students, or what is open and available to our full-time students as alternatives to taking classes in our buildings should be open and available to our homeschool students. And that's a district-wide question that I think the CAC can focus on and get us district-wide input. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Schuler, but we do have a couple more openings on the CAC, and I would encourage homeschool parents to think seriously about applying for those positions, because we do want your input. But some of these collateral issues that relate to 7.40 collaterally are district-wide, and the CAC was created to look at district-wide issues for us and give us some input on direction and counseling.
I'm in Mr. Matheson's camp here. I think this is a very, very narrow silo issue, and it's very precise. And I see the CAC as more of the overarching 30,000-foot level opportunities within the district on an annual basis. And I saw some mixed numbers. I don't know if there's 30 or 36 on the committee, but I applaud them. I think they do great work. But this is such a precise matter. I would support something much smaller. I think the experts sitting in this room, as well as on that side of the room, to focus in on the associated underpinnings that may be part and parcel to this process. So I'm kind of in Jim's camp. To your point, we don't have to decide that tonight, but I think it's open for future discussion.
Any further comments from board members? Brad?
Well, we've certainly talked about this a lot. You know, I think, one, we don't want to create a board committee, and it's important for all of us to remember that a board committee and a superintendent's committee are very different, have very different requirements. So whether it's the CAC, which is a superintendent's committee, or a separate committee that gets created, it would be a superintendent's committee. I think we've shared kind of the direction that, as a board, over the last couple of meetings, where we feel is the right direction. I kind of was going to say what you said at the beginning, that if this is the policy that works for our homeschool parents and students, as well as our administrators who have to, at the school level, that have to track this stuff, and if that's the case, then I don't know that we really need a dedicated committee to look at this policy. But the benefit of the CAC is they don't look at things through a single lens. They understand the full context of all the issues, and that's one of the great things about the CAC, is that they have that broader understanding and shared through the way things are presented, the way things are discussed in those meetings. I've been to several of them. So if this policy is integrated with other policies, that is the right venue to do that. If we feel we need homeschool voice at that, maybe there's a middle ground where we just invite a couple people to participate in that discussion as guests of the CAC. I don't know if that's in our bylaws, but it seems like it might be able to work. You know, I want the administration, the SLT, to focus on Vision 2022, which we just issued or created, adopted. It's a 4-year strategic plan. We have new members of the senior leadership team. We have new school leadership. We have a lot of capital work and financial work that we're dealing with. I want that to be where the focus is. If we're near the end of we're almost at the goal line on this, and let's just, allow our team that we trust to administer the district and set the direction to focus on the other bigger issues.
I have one follow-up question Brad's just talking about. If we post this tonight, what is the requirement in which we have to take action on this item? Is it 6 months from now? Is it, okay, so could the CAC effectively meet on a committee that doesn't exist yet, that probably won't become active until some point in the future?
CAC is not reviewing this before you are approving it in August. So you are, the August action would be to approve what you are posting tonight, unless public input or direction would suggest otherwise. And the review by CAC happens afterwards. So and I think acknowledge that the last meeting, the July meeting, was that there was some direction to what we needed to do for this year, with an understanding that it would be looked at again over the course of the next year. So those two are not related.
Okay. And then practically speaking, under the assumption we would vote next meeting on this, there are a few modifications suggested tonight by individuals. How do those get incorporated? And if we change those, do we need to repost it again and so on? Or does it become votable at that meeting with possible changes to it?
It would ultimately be a board prerogative. I can appreciate, I heard your recommendations, you'd like some feedback. I can't give those to you tonight. I'm just seeing the suggestions tonight, so I wouldn't feel comfortable giving you a reaction to it tonight. But if ultimately you wanted to incorporate any future changes, I think you'd need to repost the policy as you're incorporating those changes. But again, you can approve what is being recommended for posting tonight. If you want to make some of those changes, you can do it in the month that follows. I mean, the policy can be changed at any point.
Okay, so we would have to modify it at a future meeting and then vote on it at a later meeting. So.
But that would mean the school year would start with a policy that we approved in April, which is the policy right now.
Right. I feel like, well, whatever. I feel like my microphone's breaking. But I just, okay, I understand, and I don't know how to deal with this effectively to get this achieved, I guess.
I think we can, my suggestion would be that unless we hear something untoward over the next 30 days about this draft of the policy, is to approve the policy that's presented tonight, while we take a look at other suggestions that have been submitted, and if we feel it needs to be tweaked a little bit, we post those tweaks and vote on them in the future, but the basic policy could be implemented in August, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so the fundamental policy could be approved next time, and if there is modifications that we feel would be appropriate, we can
Improve it even better,
along
yeah.
with any of those in 6 point whatever.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm ready to go.
Rob?
Yeah, I want to just reiterate a point you made, which is, I do believe this is a more complex issue, not necessarily the 7.4, but the other policies and the inconsistencies in those policies, and the ability for us to look at alternative approaches for kids to take classes. I think that's really important for us to look at. So I don't want to dismiss it. I think we should spend time doing it. Not necessarily related to 7.4, but I'm talking about the policy group and the HR group. We're taking a look at some of those.
No other comments? All right, then I ask for a motion and a second to approve posting of revised policy 7.40, addressing non-public school students for public review and comment.
I move to,
Go ahead, Jim.
I move to authorize, to post this policy.
Moved by Mr. Matheson,
I'll second.
seconded by Mr. Hanlon. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Fawcett?
Yes.
Mr. Broman?
Yes. The motion to post revised policy 7.40 has passed. The next action item is to approve the approval to post the 2018-19 tentative budget and set the public hearing on the 2018-19 budget. Dr. Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Broman. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Farley, who's going to present to the board this evening your tentative budget. The goal this evening is to review the tentative budget as well as to set the hearing, set the public hearing for next year's budget. Mr. Farley?
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. This is the point of the year where the board is asked to post a tentative budget. I've got a copy of the calendar up here, a budget calendar that goes back to January when we asked the board to authorize the preparation of the budget for the fiscal year 18-19, as well as when we did looked at our 5-year budget projection model. Tonight, we're asking you to post the tentative budget. It will be on public display until it is approved. We have to have it on public display for a minimum of 30 days to hold the public hearing. And then we ask the board to approve it in September 12, 2018. The board has to adopt the budget by the end of the first quarter, which is September 30. So that's the timeline, which is pretty consistent with what we've done in the past. The board is also required to post a formal notice that the budget is posted in the local newspaper, that's the Daily Herald, and also indicate when the public hearing is, which will be at the next board meeting here in August in the SSC. Finally, we also put the budget document on display here at the School Service Center. We send out copies to all of our local public libraries as well as post it on the district website. I'm going to give a little bit of background and history on the district as far as our overall kind of revenue and expenditure picture. I'm going to talk about the operational revenues. These are the funds of the school district that basically drive the day-to-day operations of the district. Doesn't include our bond and interest or capital projects fund. This is the education, O&M, transportation, IMRF, and working cash funds of the school district. This is, again, a 5-year history just showing overall on the revenue side what our different revenue sources are. And you can see by the key underneath, obviously property taxes accounts for the largest percentage of our overall or dollars for the school district budget. Also, the red is the other local, which is fees collected and other sources locally, including corporate personal property replacement tax. You get into the gold and light blue, and that is the state sources, and that obviously over time, as the state funding has, or the ability for the state to make their payments in a timely manner has kind of gone up and down as they've caught up with their payments. And finally, you can see the federal is the last piece, and federal has stayed pretty consistent over time. Obviously the property taxes has increased over time. Some of that, we've had some TIFs that have come off the tax rolls, or onto the tax rolls as the TIFs have expired during that time period as well. Over the time period of 2013 to 2017, over those 5 years, it's about a 10% increase over time in property taxes.
Switching over to operational expenses, you can see obviously salaries and benefits make up the largest portion of the school district budget. We are a people-driven business. You'll see that over the last 5 years, our salary costs have stayed pretty flat. And in fact, they've kind of gone up and down a little bit, but over the time period of 5 years, have stayed relatively flat. In 2017, you'll notice a couple different changes. The benefits went up a little bit as we had to run out of the existing plan when we switched over to the co-op. Also, the green, which is our purchase services, went up over the prior year, and that was based on the new transportation contract that had been bid. And obviously, prices went up, if the board recalls, went up because the cost for bus companies to find and hire drivers had gone up, so that we're absorbing that cost as well. And the other cost that is worth note in 17 is you see our capital budget, which is in the brown, has gone up over time as well as over previous years as we've started to push more money, funds towards our capital projects in the district. And finally, this is a chart. I think the board has seen something similar before. This is for last year. This is the operating expense per pupil. This is what it costs to educate students in our school districts. This is our benchmark, a look at our benchmark school districts, which include Naperville, Barrington, Elmhurst, St. Charles, District 200, and Indian Prairie 204. Those are our benchmark districts for a lot of different factors. But if you look at our operating expense per pupil, on average for our benchmark school districts, we're below the average in what we spend per student. We also have been consistently under the state average. The state has not published the 2017 fiscal year in average yet, so we don't have that information. But if you look at us next to our benchmarks, we are below the average and second least spending per student in our operating costs. Some of the highlights for the budget, we'll start with the revenues. Obviously, the CPI is 2.1%. We found that out in January, and that was incorporated into our model as well. Tax levy distributions were a little different this year with the change in the tax laws. The treasurer released funds early. Our auditors will be deferring that money into the 2018-19 budget year. So our budget will line up, plans to line up with what our tax levy distributions are with the audits for both last year and this year. Corporate personal property replacement tax, I mentioned that earlier. That's another local source that's goes to our education IMRF fund. We received a little bit more this year than we had budgeted, so that was good news. Interest earnings, as interest rates have begun to climb, we have seen the rate of return on our interest earnings which had gone down almost nil, start to climb back up, and so that's good news from that standpoint, from an interest earnings standpoint. And you'll note that in some of the funds we've increased interest earnings accordingly. We understand that there are going to be some more hikes, so that will obviously was incorporated into our projections as well. On state funding, general state aid, if we backtrack to a year ago this time, we didn't have a state budget at the time, and the evidence-based funding model was still being decided on. If you recall, the state eliminated about 4 or 5 categorical funds and rolled them into the general state aid fund. So now we receive those funds twice a month, and is obviously much more timely than under the old system with the categoricals. So we do have that evidence-based funding. We received about $370,000 more on top of our base amount that we were set to receive once the evidence-based funding got figured out. I think we found out in April that was about $370,000. The state has again allocated a separate pot of money for the evidence-based model, so ISB is telling us that your baseline for this year is what you received last year, plus about what you received the prior year. So we're anticipating another about $370,000 of additional funds. We are using general state aid in our buildings and grounds fund. We do allocate about that $370,000 or $400,000 towards our capital projects. So some of that additional funding we're receiving through the evidence-based funding model, we are using for capital work. We also are using state aid as well, allocated into the bond and interest fund for the lease payment. We have a space holder for the lease payment. That's obviously yet to be determined, but we do have general state aid allocated there as well. And then finally, the remaining categorical funding that is out there is special ed tuition, driver's ed, and transportation.
If we backtrack to a year ago, we still were unsure on transportation. We understood that they were going to allocate more funds to the transportation fund than we had received in the past, and with our costs going up, we actually saw quite a significant increase in what we had received over the FY16 budget of about $200,000 for regular ed spending. We budgeted about $560 based on that information that was conservative. It came in about $1.1 million. So that was good news on the transportation side. We're still working out through the allocation this year and getting that report in. So we've kept those numbers consistent with where we were last year. We have heard the special ed allocation was reduced, is being prorated. So we've reduced that driver ed, special ed transportation funding revenue source. You'll note that in the budget as well. Finally, the federal program, the National School Lunch Program, has been pretty consistent and is consistent in the budget. Title has gone down a little bit. Some districts got hit harder than us in title funding reductions, but with carryover we're less, but we're still in pretty good shape. And then IDEA has gone up slightly, and then Medicaid funding went up quite a bit the prior year budget, and this last year it went back down a little bit, so we've tempered that off as well. On the expenditure side, salaries and benefits, I mentioned, are our largest cost in the district, and as you can see up here, the teachers, we have it increased, the salaries increased per our contract, as well as the classified staff. You can see the percentages associated with that, as well as the administrators and non-union increases. Our benefits plan, we're in the NIHIP co-op. We saw an overall plan increase this year of about 2.9%, which is, I think, much better than what other markets are seeing. So we're continuing to see benefits of being in that cooperative with other school districts. The TRS federal, if you recall, the TRS used to charge a premium. Last year at this time, it was going to be 44.61% on our federal grant programs, where we had to pay a premium above almost 44% of what those salaries were. Well, the state changed that after we had posted the budget and reduced it down to about a little over 10%. Now it's down to about 9.85%. We also, as with TRS, will include the on-behalf state payments, which in our final budget, which is in and out, it never technically hits our book, but we are required to post a budget number for that. And then finally, the IMRF pension rate has decreased from 11% for us as a school district down to about 9.02%. It becomes effective in January, and is great. The IMRF fund is a one pension fund that is, I think, 93% funded, and so we're seeing some return on the healthiness of the IMRF fund and what the contribution the district has to make. So that's a great reduction for us. On the purchase services side, some of these things the board has seen and improved previously. In the curriculum area, the driver ed simulators were prior approved. You'll see that will increase our capital budget a little bit. Textbooks, social studies, a big adoption that is coming out of curriculum that the board has approved. On the technology side, we've had network updates, laptop and Chromebook refresh, and security cameras at 3 of our middle schools. Those are all things keeping Rod's department very busy right now, I'm sure, and those are all in the budget. On our outsourced contract, food service, custodial, and transportation, the board has approved the renewals on food service and custodial at CPI. Transportation contract is per the bid, which is, I think, 3%. O&M utilities, you heard it mentioned earlier, our utilities, we've been able, through Colin's hard work and Jared's hard work in his department, to be able to shave these costs down continually, even with a very, very cold winter and a very warm start to the spring. And so those costs we're continuing to monitor, but we're able to shave off some of the costs there. Tuition for our outplay students, that cost has gone up. Again, we've seen the cost of those outplacements, and so we've increased the budget in that area as those costs continue to go up. And we'll work with obviously the special services department on those outplaced costs and where we go from in the future. And finally, we have the lease payment. As I mentioned prior, we have the lease payment is set aside in the budget for now until we determine what direction we're heading. So it's included in the tentative budget.
Dr. Schuler also mentioned previously in the capital projects that were going on, and we do have a lot of work going on in a lot of buildings. So in the budget, we do have $3.2 million in the O&M fund and that $1 million in capital projects that the board approved for the secure entry work. And you can see the schools listed that are getting secure entries, 8 schools. All of them are in full progress right now, with the exception, I think, of Sandburg. That's the last one that'll be done. Paving, we've got a lot of work going on. If you've driven past Pleasant Hill or Edison, Franklin, Johnson, all the work is in full tilt and moving forward. Flooring work at Bauer, Pleasant Hill, and Washington. We did masonry work at Emerson and Wheaton, Warrenville South. And then finally the mechanical work, which I believe is almost completed at Lowell and Wheaton North High School. Wheaton North relative to the air conditioning, for those of you on the north side know, we had some issues with the air conditioning towards the end of the year, so that's in there. And then also tracking the capital projects fund, the costs associated with the early childhood center. So I'm going to run through each of the funds real quickly and just give some background as overall of how those funds, where the funding is coming from, where the money is being spent, and what the overall increase is. You'll see on the education fund, 85% of our funding comes from local sources, 10% is coming from the state, and 5% is coming from federal. Those numbers are pretty consistent. Our overall revenues in the ed fund are $143 million. That's obviously, the ed fund is our main course of business. It's the education of our students, and that represents an overall increase of about 2.67%. We were able to allocate more tax money to the ed fund to cover costs as the state has ramped up their transportation. So you'll see that in a little bit when we talk about the revenue of the transportation fund. We were able to move some revenue back to the ed fund. On the expenditure side, salary and benefits, $123 million, about 2.3% increase over the prior year. Purchase services has stayed pretty flat. Those, again, is in the education fund is food service, and food service is probably the largest purchase service account in there. Supplies, you'll see the increase about 4.9% over prior year. That is directly related to what we talked about with some of the curriculum and tech costs that were previously approved. Capital purchases, the increase, that's mainly due to the driver's ed simulators, so that was the increase in the ed fund for the purchase of that. And finally, dues, fees, tuition, and other, that's, again, most of that increase is due to the outsourced tuition costs associated that I previously mentioned, so that's $143.6 million, which represents about a 2.91% increase over the 2017-18 budget. On the O&M side, most of the proceeds come from the operations and maintenance, come from local sources, local tax and rental and property tax, rental, and interest earnings. We do have money in there from state sources, $400,000 of the general state aid I mentioned earlier that's helping to, from the EFAB to help pay for some of the costs associated with our capital projects. The other $78,000 is grant money that we receive for, plan to receive for some of the mechanical work that we did at Wheaton North and Lowell Elementary School. And that includes about a 2.15% increase over the prior year budget. On the expenditure side, salaries and benefits is a decrease. We've, as the board is aware, we do have in-house staff in our district, as well as outsourced staff, and as our in-house people start to retire, other than those that are maintenance are running our biggest buildings. So we've had some retirements, a number of retirements in the last few years. Over the last year, so we are seeing a decrease in salaries as well as the benefit side as that and it goes down as a number of our staff go down. We've got a slight increase in purchase services over the prior years. Again, we've got a decrease in supplies and utilities, again, related directly to the hard work of Colin and JR and all of our staff that manage our buildings and the utilities associated with that. Capital, you'll see we have an increase of about 24%. That's directly related to the increased costs associated with the capital projects that we're doing and we mentioned previously. And then we have a decrease in our overall dues, fees, terminated benefits. So overall, the budget expenditure is about $14 million. Again, that's about a 2.1% increase over the prior year. Moving into our debt services fund, most of that again is local. We have $1 million in state revenue earmarked. That's again for the lease to offset the lease costs.
We have 21.619 in expenditures payment, and that includes payment on principal and interest of our outstanding debt, capital lease that is expiring, as well as the early childhood center lease anticipated there. And we have, again, the $1 million to offset that from the revenue. We also have the refunding, which we just completed, put out information about that. We got a great interest rate, and the increase in our bond rating obviously helped in that as well. So we went from restructured debt, refunded debt that was at about 4% interest rate down to just under 2%. So,
Bill, I got a question for you on the $1 million state revenue. You said that's basically the $1 million that we're transferring for the capital lease.
Yeah, that's general state aid money that we're budgeting
for the early childhood
center lease.
That's not debt.
No.
It's not bonds that we're issuing.
No.
It's coming out of our operating budget.
It's coming out of our operating budget, correct. And then we just touch base that we have that refunding that the board recently completed as well. On the transportation side, about 54%, or about a little over $5 million, comes from local sources. State sources, 46%, about $4.3 million. Just under $9.5 million in total revenues. That represents about a 1.14% decrease over the prior year. Again, as I talk about on the expenditure side, we did see a decrease in our purchase services cost. That's our largest line item that pays for the busing. A lot of that was due to us streamlining bus routes and eliminating bus routes. So our costs actually came in under budget this year for our transportation costs, and we're continuing to look at ways to streamline busing as much as possible to absorb, obviously, the costs that came with it. The fuel escalator, as gas is kind of a crazy commodity right now. Prior year, before last year, came in very well, and then gas prices shot up again, and most of our buses run on diesel, so you got to pay attention to the diesel. When I go to a gas station, I look at the diesel prices usually before I look at the regular gas prices, just trying to see how that's going to impact our busing. But overall, about a 9.5% or $9.5 million in expenditures, or a slight decrease over the prior year budget. Moving on to IMRF Social Security, I mentioned earlier, all the funds are local, that's tax money and corporate personal property replacement money. It's a slight increase over the prior year, and then expenditures the same. Again, we are going to see the benefit of the percentage change in what the district percentages on the salaries for IMRF Social Security Fund, so we're only seeing a slight increase on that. Our capital projects fund, we've got budgeted interest earnings of about $70,000. We've got the $14 million in lease certificates if the board goes that direction. If once we get our bids in and know more information, that will be put into the capital projects fund and then go into the escrow account per the resolution that the board approved for that process. We also had the $1 million transfer the board approved tonight to capital projects, as we mentioned a few times, for the secure entries. And we've got about $15 million in expenditures, which includes secure entries and the tracking of the early childhood center costs associated with the drawdown, what would be the drawdown on the escrow account that the district is in the district's name. Working cash, again, another, we only have revenues associated in this fund, and again, this is, we're anticipating about $400,000 in revenue associated with interest earnings as the interest rates continue to climb, and the fact that the state is catching up, we are able to keep our funds in our working cash fund before we have to borrow because the state is catching up. They did just kind of to backtrack a little bit, the state has, I think the board's aware, they did make their final payment from last year earlier in this fiscal year, and they've made 3 of their categorical payments, as well as the evidence-based model accounting for those 5 categoricals collapse. We're seeing that money much sooner, so we don't have to wait on as much the funding under the old plan. So that enables us to obviously earn more interest earnings as we hold the money longer and get it in early. So I'm going to run through that was all the funds. I'm going to run through kind of the all funds summary as well as the operating fund. Again, those are the, when I talk about that, we'll talk about the which operational funds those are. So we have total revenues about $193 million. That does not include the refunding that the board just did, that $25 million, or the lease certificates. Those are considered other sources of income, so it's not considered revenue. So we have $193 million there. This chart just shows obviously 81%, our largest share comes from property taxes,
and other local, and then you can see general state aid for about 7%, and other categorical money is 3%, and federal is about 4%. Again, this is all the funds of the school district. Talk about operating funds now. We're talking about the education, O&M, transportation, IMRF, and working cash funds. You can see for revenues we're at about 171 million for operational funds. Doesn't include debt service or capital projects. And you can see that our largest source again is obviously property taxes and other local funds, with state and federal coming in a little bit higher because it's we don't have those other funds in there. Going to expenditures for all funds, about 207 million, and all expenditures, all funds included. Does not include the refunding. Just want to make note of that. That's at 25 million. It's not included in this expenditure line item. And then you can see for all funds, salaries and benefits, and this will be true as we talk about the operating funds, make up the majority of our overall budget as a percentage. And then you get to the operating funds again, not including debt services and capital projects, is about $171 million. The salaries and benefits, again, that's about 79% or 76% makes up our overall salaries and benefits. So obviously the largest portion of our overall budget. So all funds summary, you can see the operating balance is when you look at expenditures over revenues, again, the operating balance the revenues do not take into account the $1 million transfer or the 14 million in lease certificates. So it does show as a negative operating balance for the all funds. But when we talk about the operating, you'll see that we're on budget. So revenue by all funds, if you look at our overall the funds of the district, the education fund is our largest fund, 75%, with 7% in O&M, debt service is 11%, trans is 5%, IMRF is 2%, and capital projects and working cash are relatively small in revenue. Expenditure side, again, education fund is the largest, with O&M and debt service being the other large ones, with transportation at 5%, IMRF at 2%. So our overall operating budget, this is the budget that we submit to the state for our operating funds of the district. You can see we're showing right now, again, a operating balance, positive operating balance as we did last year. Basically, is all funds are balanced. The working cash fund has a $400,000 of interest earnings, and we have, I think, a $2,000 positive operating balance. And O&M, I held $2,000 back on JR for his budget. So our overall operating budget is balanced. We have a balanced budget that we will submit to the state of Illinois as this holds. And just comparing over last year, the operating budget, you can see compared over last fiscal year versus this fiscal year, we're at about a 2.5% change. And again, the operating budget doesn't include the debt services or capital projects fund. So I ran through that relatively quickly. I'm ready for questions that you may have.
Any board member questions, Jim?
Just to run through a couple of pages. I don't know if you want to go back to the pages.
Sure.
Why don't you go to number 2 from that? Or, operating revenue. Now, the green bar is local property taxes. What, that is obviously growing. What's causing that to grow? Is it the debt service money? There's some 2% kind of CPI increases.
Right. This is basically attributable to, as I mentioned, the CPI increases that, as the cost of living increases that we get for property tax. This is just operational, so this doesn't include debt service.
Okay.
So this is basically the CPI increases as well as any new growth of the district. New construction that comes on the tax rolls, as well as the ending of those TIFs.
Okay. Oh, the TIFs. Okay, that's another piece.
That's incorporated in that as well.
Okay, next slide. Just to look at that, basically what we're saying here is salaries have been fixed for that 5-year period.
They've been basically flat, yes.
So even though there's been CPI increases for wages, et cetera, they're basically a fixed number. How can that happen?
Well, some of it's due to retirement, some of it's due to the contracts at the time that the board approved, favorable contracts. But this is the overall salaries for the entire school district. So if you look back, to 2013 to 2017, we are relatively flat, and we've had
some rises and some falls, some reductions in the overall salaries of the district, but it's been maintained pretty flat over that time period.
Or another way of saying that is, as individuals retire at the higher end of the scale, we're hiring people at the lesser end, and that's caused it to basically be even. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I think it's a combination of that and favorable contracts.
Okay, looking at the orange bar, which is employee benefits.
Yes.
What's included in that line? And that grew quite a bit in 2017.
Yeah, that was basically as the run out. It's health benefits, it's the payments to TRS, those are the IMRF Social Security Fund. Those are the main benefits that are included in there, and that increases due to the run out of the self-insured plan that we had, and we went as that plan as we switched over to the pooling plan. We did have that run out of those costs from the self-insured plan, so that was the main reason for that 1 year increase.
There's nothing in there for the on behalf payments, right?
No, sir.
All right. Okay, that one. Next page. So we're saying here that we are on our peer group, which is basically comparably sized districts in the area.
Large unit school districts in the area, correct.
Okay, we are the 5th out of 6th in cost per student.
Correct.
Okay, now this is based on 17. Would we expect that to have changed a lot in 18, the year that just ended?
No, probably not. No, we've been pretty consistent in that spot compared to our benchmarks, and again, we are under the average for our benchmarks as well as under the state average, which is all school districts as far as spending per students. And we have been the last few years. State hasn't released the 17 average yet, but I'm assuming we'd still be under that number.
That's pretty good, right? You happy with that?
Sure.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Because I am. I think that's an important project that we are doing that. That's very efficient. Next one. Okay, so the revenues, you have 2.1% in there, and that's the CPI increase. That's a given. Now I know what I was going to answer. You mentioned something about the early tax money that came in because people were paying their tax bills in December to get deductions. Now that won't affect our numbers because we report on the accrual basis. So we still have 1 year revenue only in our numbers, right?
Right, yeah, the auditors will be deferring that money, and our budget is set up so that we talk to our auditors about it, and our budget is going to be consistent even though it's on a cash basis with what we receive, so our audit doesn't look out. Last year's the audit for the prior year as well as this year are not out of whack.
Okay, next page. The benefits, the NIHIP upcoming plan year overall increase of 2.9, that's the health insurance, isn't it?
Correct.
And we went to that co-op about 2 or 3 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
And we were averaging in the area of 5 to 10% prior to that, weren't we?
Yeah, we were using 7% on an annual basis for that, yes.
And now we had that runoff last year, but now we should start reaping the full benefits of that program. Did we cut benefits to the staff?
No.
Okay, so we basically we're buying more efficiently.
Correct.
Is that the first thing? Okay. All right, and the staff's been happy with that, have they not? With some of the alternatives and so on?
Yes, we've been able to offer more options in HMO, a high deductible plan, and we've actually seen the HMO went down, I think, 11% this year, so we had a lot of people, including myself, who jumped to the HMO.
Great. So that's definitely paying off. Next page. This is the expenditures, I believe, yeah. How much is in, I know the summer project, how much is in the, what we've been calling the Sherman Durgis funding in this budget we're looking at?
This budget would, I believe it was $7 million, which was, if I remember correctly, Jared, the majority of it was Jefferson. For Jefferson, work related to Jefferson. So,
I'm sorry, that was the estimate of Sherman Durgis.
Right, I'm sorry, yes.
What is the amount in the budget itself this coming year? In this budget we're looking at here, how much money are we taking out of operations, if you want to call it, or setting aside for our...
4.2 million.
4.2 million. So that's the 2018-19 number.
Yes.
If we work forward 1 more year, does that number go up substantially in
the Sherman Durgis number would be about 7.3 million.
For the year
1920.
So that's still something we have to deal with, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right, just out of curiosity, yeah.
Before I leave this slide, just to clarify, so all these projects were part of the referendum, right?
Yes.
And so we're doing all this using resources that we have right now without issuing debt. right? We're using the fund balance. And so if you follow some of the logic that we heard about earlier tonight, the community said no to all that, right? They said no to secured entrances. They said no to mechanical work. But we did that survey, and we heard from the community about what the priorities would be, and that's what this work generally represents, the feedback we heard from the community, right? So even though, you know, we hear all the time that they said no to the early childhood center twice, you know, there's a lot of other work included in that scope of that referendum that we know as board members, as we look at all of our lenses, still has to get done using the resources we have.
Just to be clear on that, in my opinion, when I voted for the approval of the referendum, I did not believe that the early childhood center was in that number. I felt it was out of fund balance. So I'm not sure I agree with that. And as I conveyed that, I'm not sure that that's really was defeated as a separate, distinct entity in that last referendum. So that's just my opinion. Anyway, continuing on, we heard something about solar energy tonight. Have we ever looked into that, or, you know, do we consider doing that?
Yeah, so the Early Learning Center is actually, yes is the quick answer to that. That building has been designed under the board's policy or directive to design buildings that are energy efficient. We've designed that building with a geothermal system rather than a solar system. Solar, again, I haven't had a chance to vet a lot of the information that's provided to you tonight, but geothermal, as we investigated options for energy efficiency, the upfront cost associated with geothermal is much more manageable, thus kind of returning a payback. The ROI is a lot quicker. Solar still is a bit higher, and I think some of the grant programs that were suggested tonight, I don't know that would apply to the structure that we have for leasing that building, because we will not own that building until lease is paid off.
If we put solar panels on Whittier, is it just you plug it in and it works, or is there a lot of infrastructure that has to be done within to make that an operating system?
I can't give you the detailed answer to exactly how solar is going to work, but yes, there's infrastructure tied to it. And again, as we've investigated that with JR and with our architects, the return on investment, that window of time for payback, I think still is a little bit long.
Okay, next page real quick. The 10% increase from the state on education funding, is that, what's causing that 10% increase?
That's not a 10% increase, that's 10%.
Oh,
it makes up 10% of the overall revenues of the education fund.
Okay. Going to the next page. The funding, I mean, we're basically at CPI or less on everything except dues, fees, tuition, and other. We're looking at almost 9.3%. Is that, now that's primarily tuition for students that we cannot educate adequately within our boundaries. Is that right? We have to send them to an external source.
We have to outplace them to an external source.
Okay. Is that a growing population or a growing cost?
Probably both. I don't know the most current number, but I know I think we're higher than we were in previous years overall number-wise, and those costs do go up considerably each year as well.
So can I ask a question on that? Sure. So we talked about our OEPP, is that that's about 12,000-ish per student. So what is generally the average of a cost per student if we have to outplace them for special services?
Average cost,
order magnitude range.
There's a wide spectrum of that, and elementary is usually a little bit cheaper than if you try to do that outplacement at the high school level. At the elementary, 50 to 60, but sometimes we're at $200,000 of outplacement tuition for a child. So there's a wide range.
So I guess my point is, those costs per student are way in excess of what we would operate here for those students who we educate within our schools.
I just signed all of the forms for our students that are placed out of the district, and the cost ranges from about $170 a day up to $500 a day, up to substantially higher if you're talking about a residential placement.
Okay, and then next page, I guess. Yeah, just to be, I'm sorry, one more. I lost page. Well, I just want to reiterate that the money in the, it's called, I think, the debt service fund. Yeah, debt service, there's $1 million of state revenue. And as Brad referred to before, that's the money that we're going to get from the lease funding. Is that correct?
We are allocating $1 million
Oh,
of general state aid into the debt services fund to make payment on the lease, potential lease for the early learning center.
So in reality then, we are not doing debt service on that. There's no new bonding. We're really taking that from operating costs. Is that, even though it's called state aid here, it's really, we're taking money that would otherwise be available for educational operating expenses and assigning it to this fund to make that payment.
Yes.
So we're in effect reducing our operating expenditures by that, not increasing taxes. For the first thing. And just to reiterate one more time, operationally, we are basically break even or slightly above break even, 400,000, I think, out of a what, $170 million budget.
Our 2018-19 budget is balanced.
Okay. And how did we come in last year?
We're still waiting to close out, but we with the state be catching up and making that last payment from the prior year, and looking at expenditures, came in under, I think in every fund came in under what we budgeted, and revenues will be over. So we still have to pull out that extra tax money that came in, or the tax money that came in early, but we'll come in a positive situation.
That's all the questions I have.
So if I follow that, if we approve this budget in a few months, how many years in a row is that a balanced budget that we would be?
I think this is the 8th year we've had a balanced budget.
This year? So this would be 9?
This would be the 8th, I think.
Or better said, as long as anybody on this board has been on the board. Just give recognition.
Here, here. Any other comments or questions from board members with respect to posting the proposed budget?
Thanks, Bill. That's a major task.
Yeah, Mr. Brawley, thank you very much. Very much. Accordingly, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the posting of the 2018-19 tentative budget and set the public hearing on the 2018-19 budget.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Masterson.
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Paulson. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Hanlon?
Yes.
Mr. Broman?
Yes. The motion to approve the posting of the 2018 19 tentative budget and set the public hearing on the 2018-19 budget has passed. We now move to the third action item, which is the approval to release bids for early childhood center. Dr. Schuler.
And so the board's facility committee has continued to provide oversight as we work through the design and development of the construction documents. Paul's here this evening to provide an update for the board, and the recommended action this evening is that you vote to put this project out to bid. So, Paul, go ahead.
Thank you. Am I on? Just lit up. Wait about 2 seconds. It's green. There we go.
I think I'm in now. All right, here tonight, just to kind of give you an update. Last board meeting, Brad kind of gave an overview of where we were, but tonight basically I'm going to give you kind of where we've been and what we've been doing and what's going to happen moving forward. Good button.
Is it green on the right side? The switch?
No, it's not. We'll turn it on. Sorry. All right, so yeah, going through that. So basically back in November of last year, we started the schematic design process at a breakneck pace, running over about a 10-week period. We basically came in and revisited the initial design concepts that were developed, and then basically started developing the plans, looking at the site, the topography, the building layout, confirming the program, starting to look at beginning mechanical systems. We set up a core team to review and confirm the program and concept plans. Had about 3 meetings over that period. Worked with Nicholas and Associates to work through budget numbers, and that 10-week period ended in January with our proceeding into design development.
Design development phase, about a 12-week process. We basically refined the plans, started working on interior detailing, developing materials, picking materials and determining systems for the building. At that point, we also established a separate design team to focus on the details, which was really made up of administration and primarily staff at the Early Childhood Center, so that we can dive, get a deeper dive into identifying specific needs for the early learners. We had about 4 meetings during that period. Court team kind of came in as a oversight just to make sure keeping on track. Again, continuing to resolve budget. At the end of that process, we were in the range where we needed to be, and we're authorized to proceed at the April board meeting. And then for the past 13 weeks, we've been refining the plans, getting them ready, working off of all those concepts that we developed, and began to work out, specific details, building systems, building envelope, roofing, cladding, materials, foundation system structure, really getting the documents put into a position to put them on the street, get them out to bid. Had about 4 design team meetings. We also held a 3D building walkthrough, which Brad spoke to, or Board Member Paulson spoke to at the last meeting, where we took staff through the spaces from a point of view perspective, and we're able to basically walk through pretty much the whole building. At that point, then core team came in, also we looked at some budget items, began to identify alternates that we could take to allow flexibility in the bidding process. Last board meeting, we were updating still on track, and as of last week, working through with Nicholas, we're still tracking on budget, looking forward to moving forward and seeing where that comes in with the bids. So then schedule moving forward, obviously tonight's board meeting, we're on track right now to issue bid documents at the end of the week, at which point, and that's really issuing them to Nicholas so that they can get the final package together, and I believe would be on the street Monday. Or the following Monday.
Yep.
We're looking for a receipt of bid date in first week of August. Bring that to the August board meeting for approval to award the contracts. I have mobilization. Really what's happening there is more behind the scenes things. We really probably won't start actually moving dirt on site until after the groundbreaking, is what I understand. But the construction mobilization is really just starting to get the process rolling, getting contracts put together, getting them on board, permitting, all those things that happen behind the scenes. And then still tracking for an August 19 substantial completion and occupancy. And then obviously, as we always said before, looking at landscaping and some of those things that would probably trail behind, because we obviously have to demo the old building first. One of the things that would happen, or is happening, or is scheduled to happen, pending obviously approval tonight, we're looking at doing a test well out at the site, which is really to confirm a geothermal test well. That's really to kind of confirm the assumptions from the engineers in terms of what type of conductivity we're going to get from the earth. We're looking to do that tomorrow, actually. So you may have driven by, you might have seen a piece of equipment sitting out in the baseball field. I think they're getting that all set up so they can get that moving tomorrow. So with that, obviously we didn't all get here. I mean, I love an audience too, but I think really there's a big team behind me. So it's not just me. It's you, the board, the staff, the administration, obviously our staff back at the office, Nicholas and Associates, Joe's here, Lauren's here from my office, and then all of our consultants who you really don't get to see, and they don't get to be here, but working with Hitchcock Group, Cage, and 2010 Engineering. So I wanted to recognize them as well. So with that, I will take any questions you may have.
Do we have a feel yet for the process we'll go through? Do we have a feel yet for the process we'll go through between August 8th and August 15th? It's a narrow window between receipt of bids to the board meeting. What has to occur in that week in order for that board meeting to be effective?
What we'll be doing is after we receive bids, Nicholas is going to go through a process of vetting the bids. And then we're also going to go through and break down and identify where those dollars are, what they're allotted to, so that we can identify to make sure we're still on track with the, the budget goals. And then from that, we'll get the letters of recommendation together and stuff before in advance of that board meeting, so that when we bring it to you, we can say we're on budget and hopefully everything's on track and we can award. That would be the intent. And yes, it is a short time frame, but it's definitely doable.
So just to follow up on that, how many prime contracts are we receiving bids for?
11 bid packages.
11 bid packages, 11 prime contracts. It's conceivable that as those 11 bid packages come in, there might be some discrepancies, low bidder issues, issues we have to deal with. Are there some of those 11 bid packages which are absolutely have to work through and get approved because of schedule by August 15th, and maybe some of the other ones which later on in the construction process, which if we had to delay them a month?
Yes, anything related to foundation work or structural work, those are things that we need to be in a position to move forward. So our expectation is that all the bid packages come at or under budget and we can move forward rather quickly. But like Brad said, if for some whatever reason there's some irregularities in a bid that forces us to go out for a rebid, we have that opportunity to do so on any given individual bid package. It's not all or nothing. It's 11 different action items.
So, it would not be abnormal for us to have to come back in another board meeting or two to follow up on some of those later bids. The other thing that I wanted to point out was just to kind of make sure we're using, I talked a lot about language around dollars. And so when we've been talking about dollars the last year, it's been talking about the budgets, talking about the estimates to measure how we're doing against those budgets. Now that, assuming this proves going out for bid, now is the process with which the market is going to go through a competitive process to bid against each other to see how we're doing against those budgets that we've established. So it's an important thing to understand. We haven't been looking at costs so far. We have been, Nicholas is going through the estimating process. Now the market's going to go through and kind of competitively work against each other and get other individual subcontractors to give us a bid for 11 bids. The one thing that I want to kind of reinforce that I brought up last time, we had a lot of conversation about these alternates. We've made some choices at the last meeting, or there was some information shared at the last meeting about alternate bids. I think when we come to that August 15th meeting, it would be important for the board to have that list and what the individual scope is of those alternate bids, those separate prices, what's the value or benefit of choosing that versus not choosing that, what are the priorities, so that the board can understand, how those separate prices that we're going to get. I think that would be an important document to help us make informed decisions about other costs that hopefully we'll be able to get to choose, because hopefully we're going to be coming in on a budget. So I think that document, in our board package the next month would be very valuable to the other 6 people.
I have one question. We've referred to the term budget many times. I have a number of what I think the budget is. Could we kind of reiterate what that number is, so I have I don't be surprised when we open them up, and be clear what is included in that budget? I know there's demolition and certain other things that are not included, but what is that number that we're going to hope to beat when we open these bids?
Yeah, the lease number is 15.5 with a total project number, Joe, of 16.
It's a 16.8-ish, 8 something?
Yes.
Something like that.
16 total project of 16.8 that includes demo, furniture, fixtures, equipment, all of the post-construction elements.
Okay, but the number we're referring to today is not demo. We're not going to open a bid on demo, or we are?
You will. That's demo. So again, all of, even some of the elements that are post-construction elements that you will be paying potentially directly out of district funds or fund balance. Those will be a part of the competitive bid package, because you want to get the best bids to complete those projects up front. So they are part of the bid package.
I recall the number of 15 million that we talked about, which excluded equipment, including demolition?
15.5.
15.5, okay, that's the number. I would like to make sure we have that number when we're done. You know, exclude those other things, because that's the one I think is the ultimate test that we've looked at on this whole project, so hopefully.
If you go back, we've been tracking the budget consistently around the total building cost and then the total project cost that includes the post-construction. And when we went from the schematic design to design development, we've been tracking that with the same budget form, and I think when you see final bid tabulations, you will see it in that same format that will allow you to easily track where we are.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear.
I have one question. Bill, you had a placeholder of $14 million in the budget, so that's not squaring with what Dr. Schuler says is 15.5.
If you recall, we did transfer $1.5 million to the escrow account, so we already have that $1.5 million sitting in the escrow account. So we don't anticipate the overall, because the project, the timing of the project, we're going to be in another fiscal year with this project. So we will have a budget, next year that will include some of the capital costs as well. But we've got $1.5 million that's already in the escrow account, and then that $14 million of lease certificates would be the 15.5 in the escrow account.
Any other questions or comments from board members? Hearing none, I ask for a motion and a second to approve the release of bids for the Early Childhood Center.
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Hanlon.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Paulson. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Hanlon?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Broman?
Yes. The motion to approve the release of bids for the Early Childhood Center has passed. We now move on to oral reports. Dr. Schuler, introduction to every student succeeds act.
Thank you, Mr. Broman. So as Julie Ozumkowski comes up to the podium, just a quick bit of context. What we're providing for the board this evening is a little preview of what's coming this year. So as we move into this school year, just a reminder that we are going through I think what is a fairly significant shift in federal policy around K-12 education. So we've moved out of the No Child Left Behind era. We are now governed by what's called ESSA, or the Every Student Succeeds Act. That will have some impact on not only the way that we go about assessing schools, but the way that those designations look on school report cards as we get into October. So this is a very early preview to what I think is going to be some of the conversation as we move into the fall, and certainly what will be released on report cards as we get into October. So again, if your head begins to spin as Julie goes through all of this, it's okay. This is the first blush to begin to kind of build your understanding around ESSA, understanding we're going to have to continue to share and unpack some of this information as we move through the fall. So, Julie, go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. Tonight's introduction to the Every Student Succeeds Act will center around 4 key questions. What's the history behind ESSA? How will it rate schools? How does ESSA impact finance? And what are the next steps for us as a district? The history behind federal accountability for public schools can be traced back to the 1950s. President Dwight Eisenhower signed the National Defense Education Act. It provided funding and accountability for science and other initiatives in response to the Soviet launch of the Sputnik satellite. And then when he was inspired by the civil rights movement and his years as a teacher in a low-income school, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And ESEA was the starting point for the title grant funds, the ones Mr. Farley was talking about tonight. Bills like ESEA are subject to being renewed every few years, and this includes renaming. President George W. Bush signed the No Child Left Behind Act in the year 2000, and it included many practices that have been piloted at the state level. In 2011, Congress was debating how best to revise No Child Left Behind, so President Barack Obama added some short-term education funding with accountability attached to the stimulus package. And this short-term temporary initiative was called the Race to the Top. And Congress did reach consensus in 2015, and President Obama signed the Every Student Succeeds Act. Whenever the federal government
passes an education law, each state is charged with designing its own implementation plan. So what we're talking about tonight is the Illinois-specific response to ESSA. And so how will it measure schools? There's 3 key components to accountability. Subgroups tell us who is being measured. Metrics describe what is being measured. And school designations describe the names of ratings and how they are assigned. So first of all, what's a subgroup? The subgroup is a small group of students that is measured both as a part of the whole and then also as a small group by themselves. And the main intent or purpose is for us to help us make sure that all of our students are benefiting from our great learning environment. Some of the subgroups have stayed pretty much the same. For example, the ethnic and racial subgroups, as you see there, are the ones that are familiar to you from previous accountability systems. Low-income students will also continue to be tracked, only they've been renamed economically disadvantaged. But there have been significant changes to the programmatic subgroups. The English learner subgroup now only applies to students who qualify for direct services. Once a student qualifies to exit, they'll now be moved to a new subgroup called former English learner. And they'll stay in that subgroup all the way until they graduate high school. Another change has been to the students with a disability. Before, it included only students with an individualized education plan, or IEP, in other words, students who qualified for special education. Now, it will also include students with a 504 plan. They have a disability, but they don't qualify for special education services. They simply have a plan for accommodations. Those students will be tracked for 4 years if they exit services. So those are 2 major shifts with subgroup-wise. Subgroups there are a lot of benefits to them as we strive for equity, but it's important to keep in mind some of the limitations as we analyze the subgroup data. One change is that the subgroup size has been reduced to 20 students. That's half of the 40 student subgroups that were used under No Child Left Behind. So what that means is a single student can shift a school's score by 5% in some cases. There's also a limitation to the definition of some of those groups. By definition, per the state, an English learner is a student who has not yet reached proficiency in English in listening, speaking, reading, or writing. And yet we're measuring them on a test that measures proficiency in reading and writing. So in some cases, the subgroups, the definition makes it interesting. There's also duplication. What that means is one student can appear in multiple subgroups and count towards multiple subgroups. This example here shows where a student could count toward the white subgroup, student with a disability, and economically disadvantaged. And you'll notice on that last slide that it referred to a student who moved in just weeks before the test. Another change, previously students had to be enrolled May 1st of the previous school year in order to count toward accountability. They now count if they enroll in a school by the halfway point of the current school year. And one last change to metrics on how students are counted. All student scores will now be assigned to their serving school. In other words, the school the students attend. In the past, if a student needed special ed services and was transferred to another school, their score is still attributed to their home or neighborhood school, but now it will be attributed to whichever school they are attending. As far as the implementation timeline, we've all talked a lot with Vision 2022 about using more holistic metrics to measure our students' learning and their development. And ESSA does contain some of these more holistic measurements, however, they're being phased in very gradually. We're going to go over the metrics in the next few pages with the following color codes. Green metrics will be part of what they call the preliminary data. That is data the state is just in the process of starting to release. It's based on our 2016-2017 school year data. If it's marked blue, we expect it to be added in the fall later on when they release the designations for our 2017-2018 data. Those marked in gold will be included fall 2019 or later. So for elementary and middle school, you see the academic indicators. ESSA splits indicators into academic or school quality, 2 categories. The academic indicators will comprise 75% of the school's rating. So for our first preliminary ratings, it's going to include English language arts test scores and math test scores. Those right now are PARCC. However, PARCC has been discontinued and we anticipate a new state test for the next school year. English learner proficiency is included up there. There are question marks on it though because there's ongoing debate about how to measure that exactly. And then for the fall, growth on state tests is also anticipated, but again, there's some ongoing debate as to how that's going to be done and when it will be started. Science test scores will be included later on down the road. Of the school quality and success indicators, these are the more holistic indicators as you look at it. There's one that will be counted this fall for elementary and middle school, and that's attendance. It's very similar to our district metric, where we're looking at the percent of students who are at or above 90% attendance. So that one should sound very familiar to us. High school is very similar to elementary and middle school. The two major differences of the test is the college entrance exam, SAT. That has been renewed for the next several years, so it should provide steady trend data. And a graduation rate is also included. And that will be for all students and subgroups. For the student quality and success indicators, attendance will also be included for high school. Freshmen on track has appeared on some state documents and not others. That's similar to our district metric where we track the grades and credit hours of our ninth graders to make sure they're on track for a timely graduation. And long-term, possibly long-term, the model that's gaining traction right now is that once all the metrics are involved, each metric will be given a certain amount of points for a total of 100, and schools will be assigned a letter grade of A, B, C, D, or F. However, that is not happening this fall. This fall, there's a simpler model, a 4-tier model, school designations. Tier 4 represents the lowest 5% of schools in Illinois. And Tier 1, by contrast, is composed of only the top 10%. And within that top 10%, they also have to have 95% participation in tests for each subgroup. And none of their subgroups can score lower than all of the students in Tier 4. In other words, no underperforming subgroups. For a school that doesn't make that Tier 1 hoop, Tier 2, they didn't quite make Tier 1, but there are no subgroups that are underperforming. And then Tier 3 is a school that has one or more subgroups that are underperforming. That's one of those groups of 20 or more students which may be underperforming. So those are the 4 designations we expect to be applied for the final designation in the fall. Right now we know that Tier 3 and Tier 4 will be required to write some sort of plan and submit it to the state, and we believe it will revolve around the school quality framework developed by the state. It asks schools to look at their improvement process and their student learning through several lenses. They include culture and climate, the supports that are offered to teachers and having high expectations for students, shared leadership, which includes giving teachers a voice in professional development and also incorporates some of the student voice we've talked about at the district level, governance, which basically that refers to the systems and support we as a district provide to schools, and the framework also looks at the quality of staff and our connections to the community. Again, that template has not been finalized, but we believe it will be revolve around that framework. And so recently that it is not in your handout. This was just released by the state. So recently, your handouts had already been printed. These are preliminary designations that are subject to change in October. However, right now, the state has identified that Franklin, Hubble, and Monroe are most likely going to be in Tier 3 due to an underperforming subgroup or subgroups and need to do some targeted improvement planning. At this point, we have an idea, we have a range of the possible subgroups, but because the state has not shared all the parameters they use, we can't identify the exact ones at this point. So that's what we know, but again, subject to change in the fall when report cards are released. And also, in addition to impacting our work in student learning, ESSA will have some impact on finance as well. We will be doing site-based expenditure reporting. In other words, many expenditures that have been district expenditures in the past will now be split among schools. In some cases, it might be among all schools. In others, it might be at a specific level, such as high school, and still others, it might be targeted based on student needs in that building. So all expenses, pretty much every expense at the district level, except for a few exceptions, will be split by schools from an accounting perspective. Then in addition to a district per pupil expenditure, ESSA will generate a per pupil expenditure by school. This will enable us to ensure that extra resources are being added where they're needed by student needs. It will also allow us to evaluate the efficacy of any extra funds we channel to a school to meet student learning needs. So given all this, what are the next steps for District 200 as we respond to ESSA? First and foremost, continue to focus on Vision 2022. You'll notice some correlations between the two. And as we work on Vision 2022, that will also help us move the needle in many areas of ESSA. Secondly, continue to analyze multiple data sources in team settings, giving teams time to reflect on data together and collaborate to provide improvement will allow schools to use this data to inform them and inspire them but not feel like they are being defined by it or feel defeated. It will allow them to make the changes they need to improve student learning. And lastly, district staff will collaborate with schools to develop communication plans tailored to each school so that we can tell our own story about the learning taking place in our schools. So that's just, like Dr. Schuler said, a very quick summary of a very complex system that's still unfolding as we speak. But do you have any questions about it at this point?
I'm intrigued by the preliminary designation, Tier 3, underperforming 3 of our 4 middle schools. Is that a surprise to people in the know?
Well, based on subgroup sizes, under No Child Left Behind middle schools also were under the most scrutiny because of subgroups, because they have the largest subgroups. High school right now is only testing 1 grade level, 11th grade under state testing. The rest of the testing we do is our choice. And elementary schools are smaller. So that's been, and Dr. Schuler and I have both seen on listservs that middle schools have been targeted in other districts as well.
Jim, is your question, is that a surprise to us that those 3? Not entirely. Again, I think as we looked at subgroup performance, I think we anticipated if there were a couple of schools that were likely to fall into that category, middle schools would likely be included. I think as Julie mentioned, just what I have heard anecdotally from other superintendents, especially those that are kind of in that comparative group we talked about, they got the same notification about their middle schools. It seems as though that Tier 3 group is going to be kind of heavily weighted with middle schools. And I do want to mention, so again, here's the reality. When No Child Left Behind came into play and a good chunk of the educational community was screaming about it being unrealistic that 100% of kids were going to meet standards on a state test, there were groups within the educational circle that embraced the fact that the message or the opportunity in that was to focus on the performance of each individual student, right? That was a positive in this. I absolutely believe that there's a positive that will come out of this policy movement. It's not as though we haven't focused on the performance of subgroups. That's something that our principals have absolutely been attuned to as they've analyzed or looked at data. This is going to shine even a brighter light around that issue of equity and making sure that if there's an underperforming subgroup, it absolutely has to be identified by name in your school improvement process, and we've got to focus on that. To me, I think the potential downside that I'm a little bit concerned about is that with that subgroup size being so small, you're potentially putting a very, very bright light on specific students that may comprise that subgroup. And I think we're going to have to be very careful on that in the equity lens that, when we communicate out and share the reality that we're focused on the improvement of learning for all kids, that we're not also saying, oh, by the way, hey, you 20 kids, you caused our rating to be in that category when our middle schools have 700 kids. So, the performance of all students is clearly still way in the kind of that acceptable range. But again, I think the positive is we're going to continue to focus on what we're doing to make sure all kids are learning.
You said that this will be published in the state report card? In October. And that, this data, is it available from last year at this point?
We literally at the same point that the state released the letter letting us know the 3, sorry, I almost whacked you in the face. My apologies. I really didn't mean to do that. At the same point that they released those designations, that was about the same time that Julie got the raw data set on test scores. So we literally have not even had an opportunity to dig through the data, and they've not shared which of the subgroups has kind of led to that designation. It was really just sort of a early heads up from the state that this is what's coming down the pipe.
And so it will be published in the short term.
Yeah, and for the 16-17 data, we had to reconfigure it using the halfway through the school year metric, the new subgroups, all of that. Yeah, and that's been just very recent. But our schools, the good news is, I've had a one-on-one with 2 out of the 3 principals already, and they are very much focused on what we can do to improve instruction. I mean, at first, no one's thrilled to hear, oh, this is the status you received. But to a person, our principals will embrace the opportunity to do more for our students. They'll see it as an opportunity to brainstorm, dig a little deeper, and really dream about what we can do to improve our student learning.
Can you, just a question, and then I have a comment later, the slide that says school designations, that describes the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, the colors, yeah, can you explain the difference between tier 2 and tier 3 again?
Yes, yeah, it took me a while, I had to draw it out. Yeah, this is the result of like 500 pages of documentation. So what tier 2 says is, okay, you're not in the top 10%, or maybe your participation was too low, but all of your subgroups are performing below all students in the lowest schools.
So Brad, once the lowest 5% of schools are identified, right, across the state, there's an aggregate performance level at those schools. So what it looks at is, let's say at the lowest 5% of schools, 20% of the students are actually meeting standards, right? They're passing the state test. If we have any subgroup where the performance of that subgroup is below that 20%, if that's the standard, we still don't know exactly what it is, but if we have, let's say, our economically disadvantaged subgroup is lower than the aggregate all student performance of that bottom 5%, that kicks you from 2 into 3. If you are not in the top 10% in overall performance, but all of your subgroups are above whatever that threshold is, again, let's say it's 20%, then you're a tier 2.
So my follow-up kind of observation was, you mentioned park, and I knew it was going away. And so we're about this, when does the replacement test come into effect?
We will administer it next spring. As far as information about it, that's forthcoming.
So we're starting the school year, right? Teachers are going to be getting ready. We have a curriculum. We're getting into it. We're going to be measured against a test in the future. We don't even know what it is right now.
We don't know the exact composition of the test, but there are certain key skills we know that have kind of been a common thread that are testing and are useful in life that we'll continue to focus on.
And here's the one other thing I want to mention on that, Brad, is that, so park is going away. Illinois as a state owns the park items. So the format of the test is going away, but Illinois owns the items that comprise the questions on park, and very likely will use those same items in whatever the new state testing system is. So it is going to be some version of park. It's just going to look a little bit different than the existing one.
Now, I'm not trying to imply we should teach the test, but that's a term that's been used a lot. Not here, but just kind of in education circles. Last question is, if you go to the very end, the next steps to analyze multiple data sources and team settings. Can you talk about the process we go through as a school district to analyze that data and then get it out to the individual schools, and then they get it out to their team settings, which I'm assuming is PLCs? Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, PLCs and school improvement teams. And it'd be good to give a specific example where multiple data sources might come into play. For example, if your English learner subgroup is not meeting standards for English language arts, then another data source you might drill into would be their growth on the Access for ELs test. Are these students making the growth on a test that's designed for English learners? If most of them are, then that's great, and you focus on the traits, maybe the writing gaps or whatever the gaps are in the students that aren't making it. If most of the students aren't making progress on that indicator either, then you do some work. You might drill into, is attendance a factor for those students? We have data down to the standard level. We have data down to the teacher level. And so you get as granular as you need when you develop, when you identify a problem. But it starts with our principals, equipping them to use the tools. We host sessions where they come in together and brainstorm and prepare something to share with their school improvement team. Then the school improvement team generally will take it back to the PLC level. So
I guess big picture, we use, as a school district, we use data like crazy, right?
Absolutely.
We make investments in technology systems and softwares and all that stuff, and it goes right down to the classroom.
Absolutely. In fact, at the high schools today, we were looking at where each PLC was with their formative assessments and identifying, where to take the big picture data to help them take the next step. Absolutely.
Julie, I understand that the increase in the number of subgroups and the way they're designated is going to offer challenges primarily to our middle schools to perform. And I appreciate what Dr. Shua said, that this is presenting motivation and context to our principals to continue to try to educate all of our children. But at the same time, it's going to create a kind of a communication issue, a challenge, to make sure that the residents of our district can put this in perspective and understand that if we have a subgroup of 20, it could be that one student is not performing up to the level of Tier 4, and we don't want to focus on that one student, but we focus attention on that one student, but we want to focus our educational talents on that one student. But we want also our residents to appreciate that, to keep some sort of context. And in light of everything else we're doing in community engagement with our social media programs, our YouTube programs, I mean, just everything else, it's just an added layer of complexity to our communications effort.
Absolutely.
Probably compounded by the newspaper article that would come out before it comes to the board saying these are all the failing schools, right?
You know, in the big picture, we've talked about this concept of evaluating the academics that we do, and I kind of like the concept, to be truthful. It's a unit of measure, you know, and I think once we get that unit of measure, it gives us the ability to deal with it. So I'm pleased with what I'm hearing here, because I've heard about this program, and I appreciate your presentation, because it really does help us focus on some of those issues, whether, you know, again, whether they're right or wrong, or they're modifiable because of a certain circumstance, that's fine, but it really is a good, I think, a reasonable tool that will be comparable to others and so on. So I appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments from board members?
To Jim, just two final quick comments. One is, so my understanding of Tier 3, just as an FYI, because you didn't have to do it before, if you are a Tier 4 school, the lowest performing schools, then the state has to be involved in approving your school improvement plan. At the Tier 3 level, so likely for the 3 middle schools, what it means is once that official designation has come out, those schools will need to develop a school improvement plan, which they do already, but the difference is the board, local board, will have to approve that school improvement plan. So that will come here for a public presentation and approval by the board. One other thing I just want to mention, because at the same time that we got that gift from the state, one of the other changes that came out this year, you might remember that Bob has talked in the past about Senate Bill 100 and some of the changes it made to student discipline and under what circumstances you can use Senate exclusionary discipline. There was a trailer bill to Senate Bill 100 that also required the state to annually produce a list of the bottom 20% of schools in terms of suspension rate, expulsion rate, and what they call disproportionality of your exclusionary discipline practices. So here's the good news. We have an expulsion rate that doesn't even register. It's 0% in the state tracking because you have so few student expulsions. You have a student suspension rate that is substantially below almost any other district in the state. Our disproportionality, though, registers on that list. So we are on that 20% list, meaning of the students that are suspended from school, we do have a racial disproportionality in that. And so we will need to, again, that official designation has come out. We just got an early notice that we are on that list, but we will be required to develop and submit to the state a plan to correct that disproportionality in student suspensions. So more to come on that, but I'm just kind of giving you a heads up that that's coming at some point as well.
One follow-up question to this whole conversation. Is there any evidence-based funding implications on how many schools, if you have schools in 4 versus 3, does that impact money at all?
It does not.
There may be some funding with Tier 3, we don't know yet. There may be some funds allocated towards the improvement plans for the schools, additional funding, but it doesn't play into evidence-based funding, it's separately. We don't know anything about that yet.
Julie, thank you very much. We now move to a discussion item, the petition for detachment and annexation. Dr. Kuber.
I gave the board a little background on this in the board report that came along. We received notice from the DuPage Regional Superintendent about a petition that was filed with the county from an individual property owner. They own a piece of property that actually sits, it does sit immediately adjacent to our boundary line, but the property itself sits inside Districts 33 and 94. It's about a 6-acre piece of property. The owner of the property filed a petition with the regional office to detach from those 2 school districts and annex into District 200. Interestingly, right after we got notice of this, I also got notice on the other end of the district, so that's kind of right off of Mack Road. I got notice up in the northern part of the district as well of a little part of a subdivision that actually sits inside of Benjamin School District and same high school, District 94, that they are going through the same process with the regional office as well, seeking to detach from those 2 districts and annex into to District 200. Our local school board really does not have a role in that process. There is a regional school board that manages and oversees the process, conducts the hearing, and ultimately makes the determination on whether that detachment and annexation is granted. But they do ask for our local school district to determine if in fact you have a position on that agreement. What I would tell you, and I, again, I've kind of looked through this, done some reading into the whole process of detachment and annexation. For us as the receiving school district, so to speak, I don't really know that it benefits our board to specifically develop a petition on this. So your 3 options are: you can oppose it, you can support it, or you can take a neutral position on that. I will tell you on this petition specifically, I've not had any conversation. This family has not come to us to express their reasoning for going through this process. You can see a little bit of the reasoning that's given in the petition. So I don't really have any background on which to suggest to you, good, bad, or otherwise. Certainly, annexed property means increased assessed value for us and potentially increase revenue. But if you look at what revenue is going to come off of that piece of property, one student is going to more than offset the revenue that's going to come from it. So I don't really see a significant financial leeway on this, and it does sit immediately adjacent to a whole lot of other homes. And so if the regional board were to grant this, I have a feeling you're going to see a string of petitions that come. So my recommendation to the board, and this is not a formal action item today, but I'll answer questions and then kind of seek through straw poll if your direction around the feedback that we provide. The regional school board has tentatively set a date for July 30th to have the first, not hearing on this, but just the first kind of status meeting to set the timeline for hearings. And the reality is we will have to participate in that process, even though we're really not a part of that petition. And so it's kind of another, it's one of those processes we're going to have to invest some resource in being a part of it, resource just meaning time and potentially some legal review in this, but my recommendation would be to take a neutral position on it. Neutral.
Do you know where, this is on Mack Road?
On Mack Road.
It's the east of 59, or yeah, probably?
To the east of Winfield Road.
Winfield. East of Winfield.
To the east of Winfield.
By the entrance to the canteen.
Getting close to that, yes.
Okay, and it's 6 acres. I mean, does that imply there could be a development going in?
Could be. It is actually it's a piece of property that, while owned by one owner, actually comprises 3 different parcels of property with just one house currently sitting on it, so
And to the west of them, there's vacant land. Isn't that part of Barrack Lake or something?
there's some vacant land. There's some houses though that kind of
Right on.
sit and go up along there.
And again, it's not clear why.
I'll say yes, and we grant for all first. And all the EAV that comes with it.
That's a non-for-profit, so.
So, I take that.
With respect to written reports, we've all received a copy of the FOIA report and
Can we step back? I just want to make sure that we get a straw poll on that. I mean, I heard it from Jim. Yeah, I really do, yes.
Neutral fund.
Yeah, I don't understand what they could be positive point of view to do.
Zero-sum game at this point in time.
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm fine with a neutral position.
Thank you.
All right, with respect to written reports, we've all received the FOIA report and the monthly financial reports. The reports from board members, we do have board committee notes that were attached to the agenda. Are there any other reports from board members? I want to, as president of the board, I'd like to invite all board members to submit to me their preferences for committee assignments for the 2018-19 school year and adopted schools. And with the idea that we'll make appointments to those committees and allocate adopted schools at the August board meeting.
Can you send us an email?
Yes, with the reminder.
I see, can you send us an email on mine?
I certainly will, Jim. Yep.
One other item, maybe this is the right section, board committee reports. You know, I want to make sure, we've talked about the CAC again tonight. I want to make sure that we have either regular reference to that, and if we're going to be relying on them more and more, I want to make sure that whoever attends those meetings reports on it, kind of on a monthly basis or something, because I don't recall any kind of input last year. You know, I think there might have been, people went, but I don't ever recall much feedback. So I think if we're going to make them a bigger player, we need to have some feedback on a regular basis.
Well, I do know that Brad attended like the first 3 or 4 CAC meetings, 3, in which the Early Childhood Learning Center and capital improvement plan was addressed. And I attended one on the community engagement one where Erica kind of summarized her presentation to committee reports. But you're right, Jim, we should make that a regular requirement.
And I think when we first adopted that program, or formed that committee, we had a rotating board member attendance. I think everyone should do that versus having specific members doing it on a regular basis. I think that's the whole idea, to hear and, hear the different views so that all of us can have that, understanding. So I think that's an important part of that policy.
And that's correct, Jim. And the only reason we had a deviation last year is because of the importance we focused on in developing plans for the Early Childhood Learning Center and the capital improvement plan.
When did adopted schools start?
Adopted school started, don't hold me to the exact year, about 5 years ago. It was while Rosemary Swanson was president of the board. Yeah.
Have we talked about the value of that program? Now, maybe value is the wrong term, but the impact might be a better statement.
I don't know if we talked about the impact. I can circulate to you the rationale for the adopted school program that was circulated in 2014. I shared that with Brad recently. So would you like to see that?
I would.
Okay, sure.
I think it'd be good to have a guideline as well as what the board's adopted school relationship should be, and what's the plan? Should you conceptually meet with somebody once a year or twice every 2 months or whatever? So a guideline, I guess.
I'll circulate that to everyone.
Okay, thanks.
I'll circulate that to everyone. Yeah, there you go. I'll circulate that to everyone. Okay. Topics for future discussion. Again, the Early Childhood Center will be in the awarding of construction contracts. Of course, the 2018-19 budget. Our next regular meeting is August 15, 2018 at 7 p.m. here at the School Service Center. Are there any public comments for non-agenda items? All right. I will entertain a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Matheson.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Paulson. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye. There are no opposed. We are hereby adjourned.